This podcast is brought to you by Free Buddhist Audio, the Dharma for your life. Our work is funded entirely by donations from our generous listeners. If you would like to help us keep this free, make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. Thank you, and happy listening.
So, dear brothers and sisters, I'm very pleased indeed that we're tackling this particular issue. It's an issue that's very, very close to my heart and been very close to my whole involvement with the movement. I hope that as a result of our studying this together, we'll give a new impetus to this whole movement. I've got so much to say that I don't know how I'm going to... Well, I know I'm not going to cram it all into the 1 hour that I've been grudgingly allotted by the authorities. And in fact, I've decided in the last few days, as a result of addressing this question again, and much thinking over the years, I'm going to write a book on the subject. No, don't applause. It's okay. Anyway, I've been thinking that I'm an annoying sort of fellow. Lots of people will agree with that, not least Dhammashalin, my secretary, sitting in the front there, and I'm an annoying sort of chap. And one of the annoying habits I've got is that I like taking sort of written texts very literally and playing with what I find. So I enjoy looking at signs. You know, for instance, there's the wonderfully ambiguous no smoking. You know, is that a statement, a command, or is it something to do with Japanese theatre? Watch your speed. Oh, look at me, look at this, I'm doing 120. Or there's the sort of chillingly enigmatic, use the bins provided. So, I read the blurb for this event, and I hope Dhammaloka will forgive me. It's perhaps why he's forbidden all applause afterwards. But I saw what was said. It says, the vision of a new society radically focused on spiritual growth and compassionate activity lies at the heart of the FWBO. Well, blurbs, I've written blurbs. And of course one's not attempting a definitive statement. But, and of course this is in a sense true. The vision of a new society is radically focused on spiritual growth and compassionate activity. But for me it misses the heart of the matter, that statement. Misses the heart of the matter. It lacks something that makes the new society into a possible vision. It misses the transformative power of the Dharma. It's the transformative power of the Dharma that lies at the heart of the vision of a new society. I don't mean Dharma just as a teaching, particular words spoken 2,500 years ago and perpetuated down the ages. I mean a force that can transform the individual and society. Transform, of course, for the better. And that involves spiritual growth and compassion activity. Of course it does. But it's something far more sublime, far more ardent. The new society vision means the total transformation of the individual and society so that everyone moves together towards the highest possible fulfillment in the spirit of harmony and love, in the spirit of Sangha. It's a movement motivated by the power of the Dharma. The ultimate direction and meaning of the universe. The Dharma is the ultimate meaning and direction of the universe. If, as some people argue, the vision of the new society has somewhat waned in our midst, it's because we've lost a faith in the transformative power of the Dharma. We're not sufficiently convinced that the Dharma can really change us and can really change society. And that means that we move into mere techniquism as regards our own personal growth and into mere palliation as regards action in the world. So this transcendent vision motivated me right from the start of my involvement with the movement. And I've been involved in building the basic forms of the movement from my earliest days, certainly as an order member. I was involved in the first communities, involved in setting up some of the first centres, and involved in setting up or helping to set up the businesses that characterise the new society in one particular dimension. I've been involved in communicating the Dhamma in the West as vigorously as I could. In fact, I remember that the talks that Bhante gave, which really launched the New Society vision. He gave 4 talks in Brighton. Oh dear, what are they called? I can't remember what they're called now. Help? Buddhism for Today and Tomorrow. And he talks about a nucleus of a new society. I think that's the first time he talked about it. But especially powerful for me and especially motivating for me were his talks on transforming self and world in the themes from the Sutra of Golden Light, which I strongly suggest anybody interested in this topic revisits, because it really does evoke the transformative power of the Dharma, the golden light that transforms self, transforms society. Another dimension. So in the West, my work has mainly been in establishing the forms of the movement, communities. I've not worked in businesses. Oh no, I did spend one day working in the cherry orchard. I think Dhammadasa might have been there. No? Okay, she wasn't. Damn, I wanted to witness. But I've certainly been instrumental in supporting them. And I remember, again, being called by Bhante from what's now the LBC to Aryatara in Purley, where he was leading a retreat for women. And he wanted to talk to me. And what he talked to me about was setting up businesses. He said that the project, the building project at the LBC was coming to an end, and we needed to provide a working environment for people. We'd had such a positive experience of working together to convert the building, that we needed to keep that momentum going. And that, in a way, was the genesis of our businesses. There's another dimension to my experience of New Society, which is, if you like, coming from completely the other end of things, and an end of things that we've hardly touched in the West. Since 1985, I've been visiting India, and for the last few years, I've been going for 5 or 6 months each year, and participating in the work of our movement there, which is part of a larger movement motivated by the Dharma to transform the caste system. You could fundamentally say that. I'm not going to say a lot about this. I'm assuming that most people will know the broad outlines of it. The work of the great Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, who converted to Buddhism in 1956 to escape the oppressive caste status that Hinduism had accorded him and his hundreds of millions of fellow so-called untouchables at that time. Dalits is the conventional term now. And through my participation in our work there, and in trying to spread Dr. Ambedkar's message as widely as possible in India, I've seen the power of the Dhamma to change people's lives. Those who are coming into Buddhism are amongst the poorest and most deprived people in the world. And Dr. Ambedkar's movement of conversion really changes their lives. I cannot stress this enough. As a result of becoming Buddhists, people's lives change economically, socially, psychologically, and educationally especially. They become a new kind of being. It's a wonderful illustration of the power of the Dharma that I think needs to be far better known and far better appreciated, because it's an example to us here in the West, as I'll be showing in a moment. So, yes, I've been involved very closely in Dr. Ambedkar's movement of conversion to Buddhism in India. I've also been connected with a movement run by some of our Dhammamitras in Hungary. They come from a gypsy community in Hungary, and they've come across Dr. Ambedkar, and as a result of their contact with Dr. Ambedkar, they've seen the transformative power of the Dhamma. And although the work is in its very, very early stages, it's extremely impressive, and people's lives have changed already. So gypsies who are almost entirely excluded from the educational system, at least in its higher echelons, that is high school, let alone university, have really picked themselves up and made something of their lives. So I've had in my own life a strong experience of the whole sweep of what the Dhamma can do for the individual and what the Dhamma can do for society. And I believe that we need to activate this power of the Dhamma much, much more fully, with much greater conviction than ever before. Probably I'm not alone in feeling that we're in very, very great danger in the world today. I find it quite possible to believe that humanity will not survive the 21st century. There are sufficient forces at work amongst us for it to really be easily conceivable that we may not survive. Certainly not in our present state of relative prosperity and so forth. There are so many causes, possible causes, conditions that could bring about the destruction of humanity. There's still so much injustice and poverty in the world, of course. So much. And although we have a comfortable belief in the West that things are getting better as Tesco's spreads, it's not the case. In India, since 1985, and the liberalisation of the economy, that means the giving up of the Indian economy to the forces of the developed world, capitalism, malnutrition has increased. The percentage of malnutrition has increased. In India, the globalisation has meant, of course, that huge numbers of people, a vast middle class, has arisen, but the poor have become poorer, and their poverty has become more grinding, more ugly than ever before. So, yes, there's so much injustice and poverty, probably more, per number than ever before. There's so much insecurity and fear. And all that injustice and poverty, insecurity and fear bottled up in frustration and rage. For instance, in India, it's very little known, but down the whole middle belt of India, from Nepal almost down into the south, there is an area in which the writ of the police does not always run. So-called Naxalite incursions, Maoist incursions, very little talked about, mean that areas of India are not at night under the control of the forces of law and order. Sometimes wonder whether any parts are, but that's another question. So it's huge frustration and rage, because people are not only experiencing injustice and poverty and so forth and so on, but they are well aware of what others enjoy. In every Indian village, what is it? Star TV? I don't know. Yeah, something like that. Star, is it Star? Yeah, it comes from down there. Dish, yeah. Or Cable Walla. Brings in, the images of a fantasized rich wealth, which actually we don't enjoy, we don't have. And it just heightens the bitterness of their experience. And it launches, it means that people feel increasingly they must grab through violence what they're deprived of. And the world today is stocked with weapons, of course, even of mass destruction. And sooner or later, those are going to get into the hands of people who have that sort of bitterness and frustration. If the great powers, so-called, don't destroy each other, well, this sort of frustration is bound to boil over in that kind of way. So the world is incredibly dangerous. It's dangerous because of our uncontrolled use of technology, which has meant that we are, well, destroying the natural world around us, or at least making it possibly uninhabitable. And the whole thing is made even more unstable by the fact that the system which is driving the world today is so extraordinarily unstable. We've had a very strong experience of its instability in the last 3 years with the financial crisis. It's a minor blip, but it demonstrates the instability of the whole system, which has only one solution to the world's problems. I often state this, but you know that when the crisis was at its worst, the leaders of the nation's most powerful states got together to work out what to do. And they came up with the solution. And it's a solution in which we can all participate. What the solution is, that we go shopping. That's the solution to the world's crisis. That's what the predominant ethos of the world today, the dominant ethos of the world today tells us. If we would all only go shopping, everything will be all right. So it's unstable, because of course that's a myth. It doesn't take much to see through that. It's exploitative, because that consumption is based upon the poverty and deprivation of so many people all over the world. And it's inherently unsatisfying. That sort of consumer dream actually deepens dissatisfaction. It deepens people's sense of frustration, emptiness, and so on. It was what Nietzsche called positive nihilism. He looked for a phase in the unfoldment of civilization, Western civilization, where with the death of God, nothing is left to keep the whole thing going. So there's a sort of, yes, a positive nihilism. We should all be nice to each other until the lights go out. Of course, we should be nice to each other and shop until the lights go out, finally, one last time. So, this is the world we live in, and I think it's difficult to avoid it. Well, you can go to Tesco's, although, frankly, I feel suicidal when I go to Tesco's. I can't stand the graphics. Colours, the whole thing. So depressing. No gaze, no looking up, nothing to elevate. A shopping mall, to my mind, is hell. If I'm to be punished for my sins, I'll be reborn in Tesco's. It's the duty of the spiritual community to tackle this head on, to allow the transformative power of the Dhamma to heal the world. If the world has any chance, it's through the power of the Dharma and its allies. In the scripture, this is the role of the spiritual community. The spiritual community has the role of unleashing the Dhamma in society. The spiritual community has the role of teaching, guiding, admonishing government. Used to be kings, of course, in the Digha Nikaya, the myth, the kind of social myths of Buddhism, give the image of the wise man based upon the Dhamma, exhorting the king to live righteously and to give basic well-being to people, especially through teaching the Dhamma, especially through promulgating ethics. That's a whole subject in itself, which will be a chapter of my book. So the role of the spiritual community is to unleash the Dhamma to heal the world, to let the transformative power of the Dhamma lift the world up beyond its narrow, selfish, conflictive perspective. So, there are three principal targets, it seems to me, three principal areas of activity for the spiritual community, three principal arenas for the creation of the new society. I'm not putting them in any particular order, but you could argue for starting at one end or another, although they're all vitally important. But the first area that the new society needs to be, that I'm going to talk about the new society as coming out of, is by addressing those who are deprived, excluded, and exploited by the current system. First of all, to help people to fulfill their basic human needs, not just their material needs, although that's where it needs to start, but their needs for culture and so forth. But that help needs to be primarily a help for people to stand up for themselves. This is, in a way, the first message of the Dhamma. When you encounter the Dhamma, the first thing it tells you is that you are responsible. You are responsible for your own destiny. You're responsible for your own well-being. You're responsible for your own future. You're responsible for your interaction with others. This is the first message of the Dhamma when you come across it. And it might seem so obvious to us because we come from a culture where a sort of debased form of self-responsibility. It's individualism as a sort of twisted self-responsibility. That message is common amongst us. But for many, many people in the world, this message is unheard. I was in a village in Bihar, not more than 10 miles from where the Buddha gained enlightenment, in hell. And there's a series of villages that some friends of mine have set up for people who have nowhere to live, people who live in the forest, people who live by the railway tracks and so forth. They'd fought landlords and the police to set up a series of villages. They were called Ambedkar Nagar, of course, Stalin Nagar, Lenin Nagar, etc. So there's sort of communist influence, Buddhist communists, if you believe me. And in these villages, they've forced the government to give housing and so forth. So I was talking to the people there and just asking, well, what work do you have? And they say, well, we're day labourers. We pick up work when we can. Maybe, 2 or 3 times a week we'll get a day's work. How much do you get? 50 rupees. There's 80 rupees to the pound. They're getting 50 rupees a day. So I said, well, what happens when you can't get work? God will provide. And I realised what Dr. Ambedkar had taught people. God won't provide. God doesn't do it, I'm afraid. There's too much against it. And what will provide is people standing up for themselves, taking responsibility for themselves, as our friends got them to do to get housing. They need to take responsibility for themselves. But many, many people, millions, hundreds of millions of people in the world do not believe they have that power. They believe that the power lies with cosmic forces, the power lies with government forces, warlords or whatever it is. And what we've got in India is living proof that actually taking responsibility for yourself on the basis of the Dhamma does transform lives. It's statistically proved. Through the practice of the Dhamma, at least the most basic level, people gain a sense of their own responsibility, they gain a dignity, they believe in themselves, they respect themselves, and they have a sense of responsibility in relation to other people. And what this has meant is that those who become Buddhists in India have improved themselves economically, educationally, socially, out of all proportion to comparable groups who didn't convert. This is government statistics prove this. There were some Dalit communities that didn't convert and some that did. And they're exactly parallel in terms of the caste system. Those who converted have double the numbers for education, take up of posts in government, economic position, and so forth. Just because they're Buddhists. They know that they're responsible for themselves. They went back from the conversion, they threw the gods in the rivers, they threw them in the rubbish heaps, they pounded them to dust, and they said, we are responsible. We can make something of our lives. And they did. And their sons and their daughters, their grandchildren, are now highly educated. Well, many of them, of course, there are still many still in poverty, but many of them are living really decent lives. I'm seeing the beginnings of this same process in amongst my gypsy friends in Hungary. That as people are beginning to take on the Dhamma, they're gaining a new confidence, a new sense of responsibility. When I was last there, I conducted a conversion ceremony for a young gypsy. His name is Kubu. I hope he'll come over here and you'll get a chance to meet him. He's an absolutely delightful young man. And afterwards, he was just so happy. I'm a Buddhist, he said. I'm a Buddhist. And the sense was that now, the world was in his hands. That he could do something. He wasn't just a victim anymore. Yes, he's up against terrible difficulties. There's a rise of extreme right-wing fascism directed at gypsies in Hungary. But he's not alone. He's got friends all over the world, and he's going to make something of his life. So I'm beginning to see that process working amongst my friends there, and I don't see why it shouldn't be applicable to those who are poor and oppressed everywhere in the world. We need to get to such people. One of our tasks in the spiritual community is to reach people in that position because they need it urgently. And the world needs them to have it. If Dr. Ambedkar had not converted to Buddhism, I think that there would have been a bloodbath in India. Because those people would have experienced their frustration, their growing sense of the inequality of their lives because of television and Bollywood and so forth and so on. And many more of them would have taken to the jungle with Kalashnikovs. The alternative to the Dhamma is either that you get into the consumer society, but the entrance gate is small, or a new approach to your own dignity, your own possibility. So I think we need to get to many more people. I'm thinking quite a bit about this in Hungary, because clearly the right-wing forces in Hungary, the Jobbik, which has been murdering gypsies over the last 2 or 3 years. Gypsies get blamed by the police for the murders, but it comes out in the end. I was thinking there that, well, actually, it's not just the gypsies we need to reach. We need to reach the poor, white, working-class peasants and labourers and, get something across to them. And it's the same with BNP and so forth. The people who take to these fascist or extreme right-wing nationalist organisations are doing so out of suffering. They feel humiliated, they feel insecure, and they believe that the reconstruction of a national identity that never existed will make them happy. And it's them we need to reach. But we're going to have to really work hard. We're still communicating a Dhamma that is for white, middle-class, educated, and those from other communities who've, as it were, middle-classified themselves in our terms. It's mainly directed to people of that kind. And there are vast and soulless deserts to water with the rain of the Dhamma. Housing estates in the UK which are so soulless, so bleak and ugly, that you can't imagine how anybody could do anything else than go and beat somebody up. The slums of Bombay are more attractive. There's life and energy and colour and sun. So we need to be communicating the Dhamma to everybody, and especially those who are in these acute states of social deprivation and suffering. And that means finding a way of putting the Dhamma that reaches them, not patronising. When I teach in India, when I teach in Hungary, I do not patronise. I teach in a way that people can hear. People who are deprived or poor or ill-educated are not unintelligent necessarily. And people who are educated are not necessarily intelligent. But it's quite possible to communicate the Dhamma in the most simple and direct terms. The Buddha did it. And to go to people who live in quite narrow and deprived circumstances and get the message of the Dhamma across. In some ways, if you can speak with conviction and speak intelligently and cogently, you can reach them better than you can the middle classes who've got so many sophisticated ways of evading and alternative options for self-satisfaction. So I think we need to really think about our message and think about the way in which we communicate it. And it's the message we need to communicate. Social work is good. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing that. It's important. But far more important is the ideas, the vision. It's not just ideas. It's ideas that communicate a vision that transforms people's lives and helps them to change their view of themselves, their view of life, and their way of acting and behaving. So that's the first area that needs to be addressed, and where we have a huge vacant field. There aren't really living ideas that lift people up anymore. Communism, socialism was an alternative. It's making a small return, but it doesn't carry a lot of conviction because it didn't deliver Tesco's. So there needs to be some, there's a vacuum of vision for those who suffer and who are deprived. But we need to be addressing society as a whole. Of course, those people are part of society as a whole, although in a way they're excluded from it often. They're not really participants in it. We need to be addressing society as a whole. There needs to be a new vision urgently, especially within Western society, which is beyond a vision of material self-fulfillment. That's what dominates even those who have a religious tag, as it were, to their name, whether it's a cross or whatever. They still live a fundamentally materialist life, a life that's based on consumption, a life that is predicated on the idea that self-fulfillment comes through a bigger TV and more channels on it. So we need a new vision. We need to promulgate a new vision for society as a whole. Personally, I derive great inspiration from the vision that Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar formulated. He was from that untouchable background, to use the horrible term just for punch's sake. But he rose up from it through education and through an exceptionally fine intelligence. You might say spiritual intelligence. And he had a very, very deep, although not very broad, understanding of the Dhamma. He saw something essential about the Dhamma that I think is quite unique in the modern era. And it fits very, very well with Bante's vision. And they sort of, through Bante's vision, Dr. Ambedkar's vision can be completed. And this is what our work is in India. I believe it's what our work needs to be here too. So Dr. Ambedkar asked, what makes for a just society? He just defined a just society in terms that may sound a little quaint to us. He defined it in terms of liberty, equality and fraternity. But he said that those terms, liberty, equality and fraternity, are not merely political terms or even constitutional terms. They're deep human principles. The principle of liberty means the respect of one human being for another, allowing them to make choices for themselves, at least within the bounds of not harming others. Equality, a deep human principle of respecting others as individuals with choice. Fraternity, a love for other human beings, respecting them as brothers and sisters. So he saw these deep principles as lying at the back of a just and free society. Justice, he said, social justice is not merely constitutional. By the way, he wrote the Indian Constitution, and he embedded these principles of liberty, equality, fraternity and justice in the Indian Constitution. They're in the preamble to the Constitution. But he said it's not, these are not, or rather justice is not a matter of mere constitution. It's not a matter of politics. It's not a matter of law. It's not a matter of police. All of this is extremely important. He didn't deny the value and importance of these. But he said that society in the end is just and free in accordance with the prevalence of a moral perspective. It's a moral perspective that upholds society. And of course we've got so many proofs of this. You see revolutionary movements, you see reform movements that simply replace one set of corruption for another. We've seen it with communism in a big way. Within a generation, those first highly inspired revolutionaries, I think they were genuinely inspired, were increasingly replaced by corrupt bureaucrats, corrupt and evil, who were prepared to murder millions for their own power. And it's what we see again and again. Dr. Ambedkar said, revolution without a preceding moral revolution is simply just changing the surface. You know, you could say, well, at least there are rogues who are in charge now. So that when there's a communist revolution, there is some gain. At least, it's not just the aristocracy enjoying things. But essentially you substitute one set of tsars for another. He said, for instance, there's no good getting rid of the British from India unless you change the social system of India. Because all you're doing is getting rid of one colonial power, and another internal colonial power will arise. So, and again, you can see it in Hungary. You've got rid of the Russians, but what you've been replaced with is white supremacists. So you have to change the moral environment if there is to be real and lasting and useful, valuable social change. So Dr. Ambedkar had a new vision for democracy. He believed very, very strongly in democracy, but he said democracy is not just a way of voting in a government. Democracy, he said, is an attitude of reverence and respect of one citizen for another. And it's fundamentally based on Maitri, on love. And he saw the moral principles that underlie society, he saw Shila, as coming out of this attitude of respect and love. He said that the law only can contain the recalcitrant few. You can only legislate to prevent a few from deviating. The majority, the attitude of the majority forms what society is. So in India, the British have gone. There's a democratic constitution. There's a framework of law that is, as good as any in the world, if not better than many. But the system is corrupted by the caste system, and it's dominated by chai pani, by looking for corruption. It's corruption, getting money for just doing the things that you're supposed to do. For instance, there's free clinics, but you don't get treatment unless you pay, etc. One of our friends came over to England just 3 weeks ago. He's in the middle of a court case, which is a whole corrupt story in itself. But he had to get permission from the judge to leave the country, to get his passport back. He said, you don't know how much I had to pay. He had to bribe so many people to get what the court is supposed to give him as right. So you just changed, actually a relatively incorrupt colonial power for a new kind of corruption. Well, in a way it's better, at least it's our corrupt people and not your corrupt ones, but it's still corrupt, a different kind of corruption. So he said that law is not enough. There needs to be a cultural change. He said that fundamentally liberty, equality, fraternity come out of a cultural attitude. And he pointed to the way in which the great social and political revolution of Chandragupta Maurya in early medieval India and of Ashoka, Emperor Ashoka, came out of the teaching of the Buddha. We don't actually know that much in detail about what that empire was like, but we know something from the rock edicts of Ashoka of what an astonishingly advanced notion of social justice it held. Just to sort of give you a little snapshot, Ashoka in those rock edicts prescribed that should be hospitals not merely for human beings but for animals. So it was a really radical vision for those times, for any times. But it was only possible because the Buddha had taught. It was only the cultural and, if you like, ideological revolution of the Buddha that made it possible. So the social and political revolution is can only be based in the end, if it is to be successful, in a preceding cultural, moral, spiritual revolution. He said, Dr. Ambedkar said that society needs to be rooted in a moral perspective, and a moral perspective needs to be not merely a sort of humanistic one, although his morals, his ethics were humanistic. They were to do with the relations between man and man, not between man and God. But he said that moral perspective needs to be rooted in sacred principles. What he meant is that it needs to be rooted in the, if you like, the fundamental stuff of reality. And of course, in the Dhamma, the moral principles are rooted in karma, the principle of karma. The universe is moral. Morality is built into the universe. Unskillful action leads to inner pain and possibly outer too. Skillful action leads to a sense of fulfillment and a smoother, happier life. This is as rooted in the way things are as the principle of gravity is. And it's rooted in the Dhamma. The Dhamma not merely as a body of teachings or as something like that, but the Dhamma is a fundamental structure to the universe, which means that spiritual progress becomes inevitable. Spiritual progress unfolds of its own accord once one has reached a certain momentum. So the moral principles which need to underlie society are rooted in principles buried deep in life itself. So the social and political revolution needs to be preceded by a cultural and ideological revolution. And it's that is our task to promote. We need to get this message across. We need to develop our means and our language. And it needs to be a language of the Dhamma. I think we need to be very careful not to spend too much time in, as it were, Dhamma light. It needs to be Dhamma neat, which really communicates the fundamental force that is the Dhamma, and that picks people up, lifts them up, and transforms their lives. So we need to develop our means. How are we going to get that across? How can we communicate it? How can we embody it in words that really get through? That really communicate the fundamental principles of life, the principle of karma, the principle of the Dhamma. It shouldn't be just, through. It needs to be. We need to be meeting the mainstream of the debate. The tendency is for us to simply address fellow alternatives, Okay, today's alternative is tomorrow's fashion accessory. We need to be addressing the alternative, but we need to be addressing the mainstream. The Dhamma voice, the Dhamma drum needs to be heard beating in the heart of politics, of social discussion, of the media. We need to change the way people think. I think as Buddhists, we often tend to underestimate the power of ideas. At least this is a very English thing, I think probably particularly English, and I mean English, not Scottish. But there's a very strong English sort of tendency to think that ideas don't really matter. We're proud of our pragmatism. And indeed, there's a quite strong anti-intellectualism, even in Buddhist circles. What really matters is practice. But practice is useless unless it's based upon principles of the Dharma. After all, many, many people practice meditation in many, many different ways, but without the Dhamma, without a clear expression of the way things are, that practice doesn't go anywhere. Or rather, it goes bad, goes wrong often. And this is what Buddhism uniquely has to offer amongst ideologies. It has a radical clarity about the nature of things, a refusal to compromise in abstractions, in metaphysical ideologies, and in formulations which fix. It's a radical exposure of the fundamental the fundamental mutability of things. Ideas change society. We have a society as we do because of ideas. The ideas of the 18th century Enlightenment are now embodied in our culture. If it's moral, it's largely because of the remnants of a decayed Christian morality. The problems that we face right now in the world, or the most dangerous point in the world today, is in the Middle East, and that is the clash of 4 or 5 different ideologies. Judaism, Christianity, a form of Islam, Enlightenment thinking, socialism, consumerism, all muddled up together and threatening our world. Ideas are vitally important. And, of course, ideas are not merely ideas. Ideas carry power. I think, again, we have this idea that ideas are simply sort of assemblages of words. But no, ideas carry power. They carry force. And we need to introduce into the world the radical vision of the Dhamma, which shows people an ethical life that produces a just and free society. Yes, we may all die because of ideas. So we need to focus on getting the Dhamma across outside the usual spheres and to government and influential people within society. The voice of the Dhamma needs to be heard. This is the role of the spiritual community traditionally, to admonish the king in his duties, to ensure that the king fulfills the basic needs of his citizens. Of course, for king you can substitute government. To uphold the moral order by administering justice fairly and in accordance with the principles of morality, and by encouraging the teaching of ethics throughout society. For instance, in schools, basic ethics need to be promulgated throughout society. And thirdly, by encouraging and sustaining the culture of the mind, a culture which provides a larger vision of what it is to be a human being. Through art and learning, of course, and through the encouragement of a spiritual life, at least granting charitable status to those who wish to lead it. So it's our duty as members of a spiritual community to get this message across, to admonish the government in its duties. And we need to take every opportunity to do this. In India, we've got some chance of this, because we've got connections with higher echelons of administration, even in politics. I, for instance, led a retreat in a large vihara that had been built by the Indian Minister of Labour, probably the most senior Buddhist in the world, really, or at least in India. So we need to be getting the power of the Dhamma across into as many people as we possibly can, both at the top echelons, the most influential ends, and all the way through. It's going to take a lot of work. We're a long way from it. And we need to be starting to talk to each other, starting to talk to other people, to create a language and a momentum which gets this Dhammic perspective across into the mainstream of society. It's not enough for Buddhists to do compassionate action. We need to communicate the power of the Dhamma, the radical, peaceful, harmless message of the Dhamma, the uplifting message of the Dhamma within society as a whole. And I think our major efforts need to be going there. Thirdly, we need to address those who want to lead a spiritual life. Not everybody will want to. I remember Bhante saying that he had a bit of an impression, he couldn't say it was scientific. If he went into any situation, he could sort of see that something like 10% of people had an immediate capacity for a spiritual response, if you see what I mean. If they heard something of the Dhamma, they could respond. They wanted to grow. They wanted something more. They were the sort of people who woke up in the middle of the night thinking, there has to be more. There has to be more. And who respond to a Dhamma message as soon as they hear it. You know it yourselves. If you've communicated the Dhamma, you see some people just shoots come up just as a little bit of Dhamma. Whatever you're able to communicate, it gets them growing. So that the duty of the spiritual community is to reach such people, along with the other duties that I've already mentioned. We need to give our fellows who feel this urge to grow guidance and teaching. We need to provide for them supportive conditions. Communities, right livelihood businesses, etc., etc. Centres where they can come together and study the Dhamma. Retreats where they can experience living on the Dhamma, and so on. We need to give them companionship. Of course, when I say we need to give them, we are them. So we need it for ourselves, but we need to be providing it for others. And providing it much more widely, much more vigorously, much more cogently, and with far greater conviction in what we're doing. We need to create the Sangha in an effective sense, a Sangha that sustains people in this really difficult task of self-transcendence, the task of the Dhamma. The Sangha is the basis for reaching these other targets. You can't really help people who are in situations of oppression unless you have that sustaining basis yourself. You get lost. You lose your way. You just forget what you're there for. Well, I remember Bhante describing one Tibetan tulku who went to America. He described him as a bodhisattva who'd been reborn in a hell world and then forgotten what he was doing. It's as if you forget what you're there for, and you just get involved in the delightful and fascinating and titillating culture around you. You need the sustaining framework to go into some of the situations that there are around us. Well, they're hells. And you'll experience people in intense states of suffering, frustration, and so on. You need sustenance yourself. You need that basis. And you need to have somewhere where you are growing yourself. If you're not growing, that force within you will go sour and will turn into something malign, or at least not very nice. So the Sangha is the basis for reaching these other tasks. Targets. It's the basis for reaching the deprived and excluded. It's the basis for touching society as a whole. Well, for a start, we need an example. We need people to be able to say, look at these people. What they say, they do. That's probably one of the most powerful persuasions there can be. If people see that you're living the life, they'll want to live it too. And yes, we need to be forming the Sangha so that we can reach those who have some spiritual yearning, and particularly they will be attracted by example. The Sangha, in a way, needs no justification. It's its own purpose and end. It's quite important that we remember that. But it acts as an example and inspiration and supports those working to communicate the Dhamma throughout society, whether to the deprived, whether into the mainstream of society, or whether to those who have some higher aspiration. I believe that this target is more urgent than ever, and that we must act more vigorously than ever. But we can only do so if we are convinced of the power of the Dhamma to transform the individual and society. I think that, we've been through a strange time in our movement, an inevitable sort of loss of self-confidence and so forth. But and that's meant that we've retreated into what, to my mind, often are second bests. Bhante has a famous aphorism, the good is the enemy of the best. I think we've tended towards the good and retreated from the best. Generalising we, whoever we are. People who haven't done that, there are people who've done it really badly. But we can only do this if we're convinced of the power of the Dhamma to transform the individual and society. So we need to bring the Dhamma into the life of society. That is our task. And to take it to people in the way that actually works. We need to find out where their sort of openness to the Dhamma lies. So, for instance, with Ambedkar, with followers of Dr. Ambedkar is our link to them and to the vision that he had. With our gypsy friends, there are few people who've come in who have this vision of gypsies educating themselves. And through that, they've touched on the Dhamma. So we need to find out what people's concern is. And a fascinating task, what are you going to say to a BNP supporter that will convince him that the Dhamma is what he needs rather than, doing over whatever the latest target is. So we need to take the Dhamma to the people in an appropriate way. It'll only convince if we are utterly convinced ourselves, if we're really on fire with the Dhamma. That's what changes things. It's not mealy-mouthed ideas, it's not milk and water ideas, it's ideas which are carried with conviction, but in this case ideas that are not ideological. That's a whole topic in itself, which I'll go into in another chapter in my book. So we need to build the institutions that enable us to do that. We need our communities, our team-based right livelihood businesses, our Dhamma centres. We need a new way of life that we are living intensively amongst us, that strengthens us in the Dhamma and that shines the light of the Dhamma out into the world, so that we can allow the Dhamma to live among the people and transform their collective life into a new society.
We hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please help us keep this free. Make a contribution at freebuddhistaudio.com/donate. And thank you.